welcome to Candybar and Antlerboy, a series where I, Mike Rapin, discuss the Netflix original series Sweet Tooth, live on the IRCB Discord stage with anyone who wants to chat. Every week I'll be discussing one episode of the TV series and chatting about the comic of the same name by Jeff Lemire, originally published by Vertigo Comics. Now let's get into the show. Today we're going to be talking about Episode 2, Sorry About All the Dead People, and just a warning because sometimes I forget, spoilers completely for Episodes 1 and 2 of Sweet Tooth. You've been warned. Let's move into the show. I'm waiting for people to show up, and it just so happens that my buddy Danny is here, so let's bring him on the stage to talk about the second episode of this show. Danny, how are you doing tonight? Come on onto the IRCB stage, man.
Oh, those stairs really get you. Hey, Mike, I'm doing all right.
Thanks for coming back, man. It was fun to talk to you last episode. Hopefully we'll get more folks for the future episodes. I want to say the first thing that's in my notes for this episode is the more I watch the show, the more I feel like it's moving away from the comic, but it's not removing like the major beats. And I don't know how far you read into the series or not, but I'm about 2/3 of the way through the book. I told myself I'd finish it this week, and I didn't get to it. But I'm honestly impressed with the way that they've been able to really change a lot about the story, but not get rid of anything to link it back to the comic book. I don't know if you felt the same so far.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I've only read the volume 1 that we did as of last week.
Gotcha.
I think, yeah, I'm just gonna wait till the season's over to keep reading.
Okay.
But I mean, so far, yeah, you're right. This is completely, we're going in a completely different direction.
Mm-hmm.
Even if we may get to the same place at the end, we're just taking a different route in the show.
Exactly. And, speaking of that, in this episode, we're introduced to Amy, who's like a therapist, played by Danya Ramirez, who's someone that we follow her as a therapist for a moment, and then the world suddenly ends. Lots of questions there. I'll bring those up later. She waits out the sick in her old office, which is like in a skyrise, and ends up at a zoo. And, for those of you with careful eyes on the very obvious thing that was shown right in the middle of the screen, it says the Essex County Zoo, which for those of you who read Jeff Lemire's comics, you would know that that is a reference to his book, Essex County, which everybody loves and I still have yet to read.
Yeah, I missed that. I missed that because I haven't read Essex County, I think.
Gotcha. Yeah, and that's the thing. I feel like, there's little, like, Easter eggs, I think, throughout this book of just things like if you know, but it doesn't really take away from the story by any means. What I found to be interesting is that another character who shows up in the story, she's a little girl with a pig nose whose name is escaping right now. She gets dropped off at the front of this zoo at the end of the episode, mysteriously, and Amy is the person that takes care of her. And I know, knowing from reading the comic, we know that the girl is going to play a role in the story. It's just a matter of how much are they going to change and how much are they going to add to her story to this book. Because if you're reading the comic, she doesn't really have too much background. She's just one of the hybrid kids that kind of comes along with Gus and Jeopard and everybody as they're traveling throughout the book. So I thought that was interesting that they introduced her in that way versus her just getting found out. And of course, they've moved things from the comic book a little bit to do that. But again, I don't want to spend this whole episode just comparing and contrasting the comic book. I'll go through a little bit more of the summary, and then Danny, I want to get your thoughts on just the overall episode.
Sure.
So Gus and Jeopard, they meet up, they go for a bit of a walk. Gus eats all of Jeopard's food because, with the cliffhanger of the previous episode, it's a question of, is Jeopard going to take Gus with him? And the answer is he doesn't want to, which I thought was really fun because this basically comes up with this little trope of like the angry adult who doesn't want anything to do with a kid who's just innocent and naive and just wants to be loved. I love it. I think it's really, really funny. And yeah, I think, they end up at this place, visitor center up on the side of a mountain where they meet a family, Bev, George, and Rusty, and there's a group of people that's hunting down Gus, and they eventually meet up with the group, or meet up with Gus and Jeopard and try to make some business, and Jeopard makes, I guess, quick business of all of them with a bear trap, which was probably one of the most interesting PG-13 violent scenes I've seen in a long time. I guess, Danny, what were you thinking with this episode?
Let me comment on the bear trap real quick.
Okay.
Because I've never seen that used as a weapon in such manner.
Right.
And then the accent that he puts on it at the end. Oh, jeez, brutal.
Yeah.
Poor Gus. Like, I'm like, oh my god.
I
Um,
mean, I
but
thought it was really funny that Gus was like totally unfazed by seeing a man crushed by a bear trap right in front of me.
yeah, yeah. I'm pretty intrigued with the second episode because I have questions, and I think that's good. And the second episode, I should start having more questions.
Definitely.
Um, we have three different stories. The first thing that comes to mind, like, are they even on the same? Like, what's the timeline? Like, how are the stories related
Right. Right.
to each other in the timeline? They keep mentioning that Gus is older than the Crumble or the Sick.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, so I mean, they keep bringing that up. I love the way the narrator keeps bringing up also, like, we're telling you the story out of order.
Yeah.
This is where
Yeah.
we're starting her Amy's story, and this is where we're starting Gus and the Doctor. Um, Out of the three, the most heartfelt and wholesome had to be, for the most part, Gus' story. It gets it gets a little dark at the
Oh
end.
yeah.
Uh, but yeah, I really enjoyed this episode. This was another. It was just about the same length as the first one, but I know they're gonna get a little shorter.
Mm-hmm.
So I love the pacing of the show so far, and just the stuff that they're setting up. I'm very intrigued, and they're doing a good job balancing out building the world and
Mm-hmm.
moving the story along so far. Sometimes, especially adaptations like this, can get bogged down in either having to do one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
But I think so far the show's doing well and keeping up that pace.
Yeah, and to your point about the, what's the storyline here? I feel like they're not gonna pull like a spoilers, I guess, for The Witcher, but like I don't think they're gonna pull a Witcher on us. And I won't go into details on that because again, I don't want to spoil it for folks that haven't seen it. But like they do timelines a little out of order in that show, but it's a very significant thing.
Mhm.
Whereas this one, I feel like they're doing things out of order, but not so much that like they're decades apart or years apart. I think they're like maybe months apart. Obviously, the little pig nosed girl, she eventually becomes a character. Like I said, spoilers, I guess, for things that I just know from reading the comic. So she's going to be slightly grown up by the time she enters into Gus's story. But otherwise, like you do have a good point. Like what is happening with Doctor Singh is
Mhm.
is his story taking place weeks after the fall of the world? I mean, I've got a million and one questions about the timeline on things in this book or in this show because I really really like the way that they are stepping back and not trying to admit anything, but at the same time it is a little bit confusing in terms of,
Yeah.
did the world end in like a day? Did it take months and months and months for things to fall apart? People talk about, oh, when the internet went out, that was when things really started to end. And it's like, well, then what was everything happening? I mean, we've seen flashbacks, we've seen bits and pieces, specifically
Yeah.
in Dr. Singh's story and in Amy's story, where everybody suddenly gets a text message and then the world like falls apart in a series of flashes. And it's like, is that how things really would go? Slash, is that what actually happened? So I'm curious to know, like, because that's not how sicknesses work. But then that kind of leads into a question of, is this beyond just natural thing? Is there some supernatural element to this or a fantastical element to this? Which again adds a lot of questions to the world. I mean, even as someone who's read the book, I feel like there is still that question while you're reading the book, and without like going into like spoiler territory on that, like I like the way that they're taking that approach for this story and keeping it extremely mysterious, but also very interesting, giving us little bits and pieces over time through natural conversations that people are having. I really, really like that so far. Like Dr. Singh's story was really good. The conversation between
Yeah.
Jeopard and George at the visitor center, I thought was really nice. Where they kind of have this, "Hey, don't I know you? Weren't you that guy?" And he's like, "Yeah, I was a
Right.
football player." Like, and getting those little bits about like, oh, and then when the world ended, people kind of gloss over it, but like who wants to focus on the minutes and hours and days of them like having to struggle extremely hard with their family? Instead you kind of go, oh, this all could happen to everyone, so let's just not talk about it in detail. I mean, because I don't know, that probably wouldn't come up in conversation. Again, I guess I'm complimenting the show on feeling really really natural about things.
Right. Yeah, it definitely does. And then I think the story that is most intriguing is Dr. Singh's because we see that his wife is alive
Hmm.
and she's taking some kind of medicine. Um,
Well, and
but
there
he
was a
goes,
there was a heavy implication that she had passed away, that she had died in the first episode. That's what I took away from it, was like his daughter had died,
Right.
and then his wife had died and he was on his own. But to see that she was up and alive, I was like, is this a flashback? Is this something else? Because without the narration, they're not going fast forward through everything. And I got some thoughts about the narration too, but I didn't mean to completely interrupt you there.
No, and I think when he's talking to the doctor, they mentioned 10 years, but I don't know if it's since they've met or since the sick started. So that's where
Right.
I'm trying to establish the timeline. Now, obviously, their story that's kicking off there, it's whatever he's gonna have to do to keep the sick people that they've been curing, I guess, or treating.
Well, have they been
Whatever's
curing
in that-
multiple people, or have they been just curing his wife?
I would think it'd be more than, like, it feels like the community they built would not just. This may sound terrible, but they I don't know that they would just for one person put all those resources into that.
Yeah.
Because it's not like anyone else is sick.
Yeah.
But if they're treating multiple people, like maybe it would make more sense. But whatever's in that book, oh my God, the notes, whatever notes the doctor was doing, and,
Yeah.
and it just sends my imagination reeling. Especially having read the first volume, and you're like, oh my God,
Yeah.
where are you going, Jeff Lemire, or where did you go? I guess. Where you take you?
Yeah, and this really kind of brings me to something that I noticed as I was watching this, and then immediately sitting down after watching episode 2 and continuing to read the comic. This feels like a much brighter story, Like I'm really impressed with the idea that they're really approaching this extremely recent, extremely touchy subject of like a global pandemic and a global virus and all this stuff. But they're taking it in a way that feels a little bit more pleasant than you would kind of expect. If you think of other shows that have done something like this, like let's say The Walking Dead, things get pretty grim pretty fast, right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that this show can't get grim, and I think that we'll probably see some of the darkness in it. But I do think that the idea of the show from the get-go, episode 1 is that Gus is kind of this bright light in all of the darkness, right? His innocence, his mentality, the way that he treats everything. He says, you're not, he calls people bad and he calls people good, but he does inherently see the good in someone. He doesn't say, if you're bad forever. He says, you're bad until you've done something good, or until you've slightly redeemed yourself. And I think even reading the comic book, you can see that, but I like the way that the show has treated it overall, because it's added this layer of just niceness to a very, very potentially dark show. Which it feels nice. It feels nice to see something like that where they're not treating things with kid gloves, but they are adding a little bit of rounder edges to a very sharp subject.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. And with the like in the scene where they're they're at the resort or whatever, and they play the record. First of all, having the Temptations as the first music you ever hear, like that's setting the bar pretty high for Gus.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, it was cool. Like I like how they're not only telling you what Gus can do, because they show you that he has, like, I don't want to say super hearing, but that's kind of what it feels like.
Yeah, I mean,
but he has deer hearing or whatever, animal hearing, and he can sniff, like when he just kind of John Wick shot him from the back. With how they were playing, but all that stuff it was really wholesome. It was really nice, like the whole everything that happened at the resort. Like I almost wish, I don't wish that because the show would ended, but like if he would just stay there and then Gus now has a family, I'd be like, oh, this was a really nice movie. Right. Like just those 2 episodes together, I was like, oh, this is a really wholesome movie. But then I remember that Jeff Lemire wrote this, and I'm like, that's probably not where we're going.
Yeah, exactly, and I'm kind of curious to know, like, when the other shoe is going to drop, right? There's these hunters that are looking for Gus constantly, and it seems that, like, anytime he shows his face, there's suddenly, like, a dozen dudes that want to kill him. At least in the show so far.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious to know how they're going to handle that in future episodes and with future pieces of the story where, like, he's obviously going to have to interact with other people. He's obviously going to have to go out, and they're going somewhere. They're trying to get to Colorado, which I guess isn't that far. But it's still going to be a distance. You're going to run into people. You're going to have to get food. And, it was fortuitous of them to come across this visitor center and, Gus having the super smell, being able to point at his nose and go, hey, look, there's a building off in the distance that you didn't see, you stupid big man, It was interesting, so they're gonna have to run into people in order to survive. So I'm curious to know how they're gonna handle this over time, and I think that's what makes the show really interesting. Is that so far we've seen actual goodness in people, and I think that might be just a reflection of the show trying to say that the world is bad and the world has its problems, but individual people are good and can be good, have the potential to be good. At the same time, I'm still waiting for the other shoe to drop. I'm still waiting for them to run into the person that's going to manipulate them or try to take advantage of them or just straight up overwhelm them in order to get Gus, because he seems like a very wanted thing.
Yeah, and I'm also very interested to know a little more behind the scenes of when the show was made and the timeline of everything that they're shooting, because they get to the resort, and then they're eating dinner, but the family that lives there, they're wearing masks to protect themselves.
Yeah.
And that felt too real.
Yeah, a little too real. I totally agree with that.
So that's what I'm like, is this something that happened before and it just happened to coincide? Because I believe a lot of the show was probably already done or at least written before everything kind of happened. But yeah, it's an interesting coincidence that would you see that scene and you're like, well, yeah, that sounds like a show that it's made after 2020, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting we'll see, how that's going to play out if it does any more in terms of like those moments. I think that might have just been like a quick one-off joke because this family seemed like overly prepared, which like I do have a list of like what I thought was really good about the episode and what I thought was not so good. And one of my not so good things was, what the heck is this family doing with so much food and like lush, like fresh vegetables and stuff like that? Like later in the episode, Jeopard picks up some canned goods from them, but in the episode when they first show up, they were eating like fresh broccoli and tomatoes and corn and stuff, and I'm like, so you guys are just chilling in this visitor center. Like, where's the big garden that you have with all this stuff? I mean, this is me nitpicking, but I thought it was really interesting.
No, that's an interesting question because also the doctor, how long was she in her building? Like, how long was she there having I'm sure office buildings have some, like, the water made sense, but, like, what was she eating? And, like, to me, the thing that it tells me is that the sick really, really, like, diminished the population very harshly.
Oh yeah,
like that, like, because that way that really would be the only way to, like, how has nobody been around to go seek refuge at the resort as well, or or at the zoo, like the fact that she can go and have the zoo all to herself.
Yeah.
So that I mean, it's pretty scary to think about that. I guess that's what kind of the world they're trying to tell us they're in. But
yeah. Well, and again, this kind of comes back to the timeline thing of like how much time did things take? Like one of my other nitpicks about this was like, Gus and Jeopard, they come across the visitor center and they're there within like the afternoon, right? And then those hunter guys come across the visitor center and it takes them like a whole day to basically get up the mountain. And like, were they waiting for night to strike? And by strike, I mean literally just yell from outside of a window, like, "Hey, give us the kid!" Like, what, you could have done that in the middle of the day, So I was really worrying about that. And again, these are like nitpicky things, but I'm curious to know like if some of the time stuff is intentional to kind of throw you off about piecing too many things together, or if it's something else. Because again, to your point, like the devastation seems very, very real without them like opening a door and like 1,000 bodies fall out. The thing about the comic that really struck me is there's a scene where Jeopard and Sweet Tooth or Gus are walking and they just come across just mounds of dead bodies, and it's a comic and it was 2011 or something. It's very much like, we gotta be edgy. Maybe it was earlier than that, but
but Jeff Lemire's writing. I mean, he's drawing that too, so it must have looked sick.
Exactly. And again, this is where the more like wholesomeness kind of maybe I guess nicer side of this comes in, where
Yeah.
they're clearly trying to portray something very bad from happening, or the very bad happened, but they don't want to necessarily get in your face about it. And I do appreciate that, because with Netflix, HBO, Cinemax, all the big private companies and streaming services and stuff, one of their big things is always like, let's get in your face with some TNA and some major violence. Whereas this show, which has the potential to do that, at least with the violence, has not chosen to do that, at least yet.
Yeah, it seems like Netflix is a little more reserved with more, because I feel like you brought up The Witcher. I think The Witcher could have been that, but it's really not. They
Yeah.
don't go that far. I mean, there's some violence, but yeah. I think another thing that I wanted to kind of touch on is uh like the hunters that come, we see they have like these military patches or whatever. Then we go to the town, we see that they have a similar I don't know what it's called, like
a sigil.
Yeah, like just they wear similar things. So like is this a community now that each one has their jobs and they're kind of marked in their uniform or whatever? Like so it's all those little things they're trying to set up for the future.
If you think about the first episode, right, with Gus's dad, when he comes across that guy who's looking for someone apparently, but then they end up marking the wherever they lived, like he said, "Hey, are you with a company?" And that was it. That was like the end of the discussion. He didn't really explain it. I think that might have been what he was referring to. Like, I feel like we're going to see in Netflix's Sweet Tooth talk about how in the future, when the government fell, corporations took over and blah, blah, blah. And it's so bad. That might be the direction that they're going.
Yeah, that definitely. Yeah, I could see something like that happening.
But who knows? I mean, that's just me making a wild guess about that. But I do see your point of, like, that symbol being a thing. And what's the significance of it? I guess we're going to have to find out in future episodes, because I'm guessing they're going to run into somebody and someone's going to spill the beans. Which also begs the question of, like, where does Dr. Singh live and what is the affiliation with all of that? Like, there's clearly a serious amount of organization where he's living. And, to the point where they have, like, a fast food joint turned into a medical facility, but like that screams organization. And they, had like a scanning thing. He scanned his wrist, when he, to do things. Which kind of, I do want to say, if you take a step back from that, like, I know you said like, oh, were they healing all the people in the town? I still believe that they're not, because I feel like he went to go have a back alley deal with this doctor, because like, they knew each other as like former colleagues, versus other people that were there for probably just regular medicinal work. I don't know. Yeah. That's just my gut guess.
I can definitely see that, because it feels like if maybe he wasn't related to her, she wouldn't be getting the whatever medicine.
Yeah.
Because they had some kind of relationship, like right, both doctors or whatever. So yeah, I don't know. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah. And again, we got to find out what's in that book. I mean, I have a really, really, really good guess as someone who has read the comic, but I don't want to necessarily like spill it all, because I feel like it's going to be a big spoiler. So,
well, my imagination is going to dark places, Mike.
Oh, me too. I mean, again, I feel like this story has taken a lot of different takes on the Sweet Tooth story so far. The TV show at least has, and so the potential of what could be in that book is vast. There's a lot, and it could be dark. This is where the other shoe could drop on the show for me.
Yeah. Another thing I put on my notes was like the little gag that they show that his eyes shine in the dark when they're in the forest.
Oh, yeah.
And then they bring it back when the kids are going to sleep, and the mom turns the light off, and you just see her. I was like, oh, I didn't expect that to happen. I was like, that was pretty good.
Yeah.
A nice moment of levity before things go down.
Yeah. Well, the other, I think the next scene after that is Jeopard going through all of their canned goods, and he's grabbing different things, and he has a book open, and in the book he has a list of different types of canned food. I think it was beans, and he had different ratings for them. And I thought, I thought that was like very funny. Like in hindsight, I'm like, oh, that's actually kind of practical if you just can't remember. But like in the moment, I was like, what a ridiculous thing to have records of.
Right. Yeah, that that's interesting. I mean, the one thing I forgot, like Jeopard seems to have a past that we need to explore. The
Oh,
mom brings
right.
it up because she sees a scar on his chest,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe he kind of knew the tactics of the people that were attacking them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, so I mean that's gonna be interesting. I know they didn't do that just for fun. Like there's gonna be something there, and I'm not very excited to find out what it is.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be dark. I'm certain about that. Like I keep saying that. Like I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop on this
Right,
show.
right.
Yeah, I mean that's the I think like those are like some of my big notes that I'm thinking about. Like the neighborhood thing
Yeah,
is interesting. I'm a lot of the questions that I had out of Sing's neighborhood was, there's a lot of order, but what is the cost? Like, what is the sacrifice for this? There doesn't seem to be like a strict economy from what we could
right.
tell. But people are living in like fully electric homes, and like his wife says, "Oh, get me a milkshake," and I was like, is this like this is when I truly thought it was like a flashback, like right before the sick, where maybe this is like a couple days before that we get to actually find out who Dr. Singh is, but instead it's like no, he goes outside, he gets on a fucking horse and like rides off, like, and
Yeah,
it's in the middle of this huge neighborhood that's powered by electricity, and all the things have like little mini generators and stuff, but like what's making that all work? Like I have so many questions about that neighborhood.
right. No, saying yeah, I definitely want to know more. And you could set up some kind of like small internet for the town.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I'm sure there's somebody smart enough to do it. Uh,
That will be my contribution in the apocalypse. I will create localized internets for people.
oh, dude, that'd be sick. Well, I don't want shit to go down, but if it does, I know where to go.
Yeah, come on up to New Jersey, man.
I'm looking for Mike Rappin. He has internet access.
Oh man.
Um, the last thing I have on my notes, a fun way to end the episode with a Patsy Cline song,
Yeah.
and then riding on the whatever what are they called? What are the trolley out of the resort,
Oh, on
the ski lift,
yeah, the ski
or
lift
whatever.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then you see the other animal wearing people,
Yeah.
and you're like, oh my god, here's that other shoe you were waiting for.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of really interesting things to pull from, a lot of opportunity for them to go in a lot of really interesting directions. And one of the notes that I had was like, I really expected more of like a Mad Max style world feel for this. In that like resources were super scarce and people were literally just scraping by, and like at the same time, like humans are extremely, in ingenuity. What's the word I'm looking for? They're extremely capable, individuals. Like we can
Yeah,
find ways to survive that aren't just living in like squalor and stuff. So Mad Max is maybe a little bit too extreme, but I do think that I should say I was surprised that we didn't see anybody like that, at least yet in the show. Now I think we're going to see some of these more wild and out there people that are like part of these raving droves of gangs that probably move across countrysides and try to find food in the most violent of ways, because every apocalypse show has to have that group. um as if like that's just what happens when we get rid of law and government in this country. But I'm curious to know about like what that group's going to be like. I'm really excited to see maybe the wilder side of things. And once once Jeopard can't actually beat down six guys in the dark with a bear trap, what's he gonna do? Because I'm guessing that these people are a bit more wild than the slightly organized crew that attacked the visitor center.
yep, yeah, for
So
sure. There's no way he can keep taking them on by himself.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and it's we've also got to like figure out where the next beat's gonna be when it comes to him with the pain pills that he had. Right? He obviously has had some issues with his knee. He was taking some sort of medication for it, whether that was pain medicine or something else. And
Yeah, that definitely looks like a football injury, which just kind of, plays with his character,
yeah,
like a
yeah.
torn ACL or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So like we're gonna see, how is he gonna survive without something that can kind of help him get along the way when there's not like extreme medical surgeons who can take care of injuries like that after they've like or flared up. So a lot to expect out of this. And again, I feel like this show is doing the job of a good television show. It's answering things while keeping things really interesting, showing you different sides of a brand new world that we kind of already know, but also leaving you with more questions at the end that don't make you feel like you're lost. They just beg for you to explore the world more by watching more of the show.
Yep, exactly. But I mean, yeah, this episode like just kind of kept it going. I'm kind of glad I'm spacing these out.
Mm-hmm.
You know, to kind of listen along with your show and all that. So that's nice. That's gonna be like it's something to look forward to now. Like, you know, scheduling something to look forward to.
Yeah.
And getting back into a routine is pretty important too.
Well, we've got 6 episodes left. I'm very excited. I guess that's pretty much everything that I had. Dan, it sounds like you were at the end of your notes, so let the people know at home, what are your final thoughts on this episode, and where can they find you on the internet?
Well, like I said, I really enjoyed the episode. I'm very intrigued. I think the thing I'm most intrigued with is I need to know more about that town. So hopefully hopefully we keep this multiple track storytelling going forward, because I definitely want to learn more about kind of everyone at the same time.
Definitely.
But the town's I'm really interested in the town. You can find me on the internet at Echo Spider and my podcast at Next Issue Pod. But yeah, that's about it.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for joining me, Danny. I really appreciate you coming and hanging, talking Sweet Tooth with me. As always, you can follow me at Mike Rapin, and you can follow I Read Comic Books at IRCB Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. And you can also check out our website, ircbpodcast.com. The music for this episode is Beautiful CS by Robert Farmer. This episode's edited by me. We recorded this episode on the I Read Comic Books Discord. You can check that out and join for the next episode that you want to be on at ircbpodcast.com/Discord. And don't forget, you can always subscribe to us and support us on Patreon. That's patreon.com/ircbpodcast, where we put up this show as well as all of our other episodes early, plus some other bonus stuff like our Saga of Saga series, IRCB Movie Club, Giant Days of Our Lives, and so much more. I want to thank everyone out there for listening. Thanks, Danny, for showing up to help me record today. And until next time, comics are good, and so are you.